Good evening. Good evening, and I want to welcome everybody to this Magisterial Redistricting virtual community meeting, which we're doing on Facebook Live tonight. And again, thank you all for tuning in and for all that may tune in after right now. I'm Jeff Minks. I'm a county attorney for Chesterfield County. And with us tonight for this community meeting are both the chair and the vice chair of the Board of Supervisors, Chairman Jim Holland and he'll tell you from the Dale District, is here, and Chris Winslow, vice chair from the Clover Hill Magisterial District, and also the county administrator for the county, Dr. Joe Casey. So we're here tonight. This is a community meeting. It's actually the first of two community meetings that are going to be held. The next one, if you want to just put it on your calendar for now, is on the 19th of October, which is a Tuesday, and that will also be at 6 o'clock. It'll also be on Facebook Live, and you're certainly welcome to attend any of the meetings. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go through a fairly short presentation so that we can get to your comments. But a presentation to talk about the redistricting process. Then there will also be a public hearing that's scheduled for October the 27th. And then the board will ultimately make a decision on the redistricting plan which would be on the board meeting on November the 17th. So we have roughly more than a month from now for a discussion about this particular issue. What is on the table right now is just a proposal, and the board has looked at just a proposal on how we might redistrict the county, but we are just at the beginning of that process. So thank you all for coming, because you're part of the process by being a part of this. And I wanted to just ask Chairman Holland if you had anything that you wanted to say before we got started on that.
Yes, Jeff, thanks first of all for outlining the process. I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This process should be one that's open, transparent, and above all, fair. I think that's so very important. And of course, Jim Holland, let me just say something about myself. I'm a four-time elected supervisor from the Dale District. Having gone through this process 10 years ago, I know what it's like to go through, and it's certainly one that really should involve and engage the community. Having served on this board now for 14 years, and it's been a wonderful process. So I can assure you that that's my ultimate goal, that's open, transparent, and fair, and that you receive all the information you need to hopefully make an informed decision. And Jeff mentioned that this is a proposal. So I'm not set on this. It is a proposal by staff, and certainly I look forward to reviewing your comments as we work through the scheduling that should take us through November 17th at this point. So we have over a month now to look at what we are trying to accomplish here in an equitable and fair way. I've read a number of emails and letters today and responded to a few as well. Thank you so much for writing. I've also read the board portal and all the comments there, and I realize there are opinions, but we want to make sure that you have the very best information so that what we do, we will be pleased with, and that it will set the tone for the next 10 years of elections, in fact, in the county. And of course, we'll talk about school districts as well, the impact relative to that, non-impact, if you will, relative to that. But most importantly, I just want to thank you for joining, for being a part of this process. I'm open. I want to hear your ideas, your examples. We've listened to our staff, Ness. We want to hear from you. So thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it so very much. And I'll certainly segue to my vice chair, who would like to make a comment as well.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. And I'm Chris Winslow, representing the Clover Hill District, and just want to reiterate those points that Mr. Holland just made, because this is open, nothing has been decided, and so we do want to solicit and are actively soliciting your feedback. And I know emails are available, but my email is winslowc@chesterfield.gov. Feel free to send me an email if you have thoughts or opinions regarding any proposal that's before the Board of Supervisors. I think it's extremely important that we have an open dialogue and looking at what the state is going through downtown. I think it's a really good foil because we only have 5 districts to redistrict, and they have 100, and then a Senate map and congressional districts, and it doesn't appear to be going so well. So I think we can have a respectful and efficient and worthwhile process if we all come together and examine these issues and hear each other out. I too have received some emails today from constituents and appreciate you sending those in. Please continue to do that and look forward to hearing from each of you throughout this process, as I know our other supervisors on this board do as well. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And thank both of you for sharing that. I will say that for the next community meeting on the 19th, we will actually have the board members here from the Midlothian district and from the Matoaca district. So we'll have different supervisors here that will participate in that, different perspective perhaps from their own districts. So what I'd like to do to start out, if it's okay, is to go through just a fairly brief presentation on the redistricting process and sort of what the rules are and what that process is, particular to Chesterfield as well. So, yeah, I already did. Yeah, thank you. So, to reiterate again, we're talking about, at this moment, we're talking about a proposal which the board has decided is at least worthy to float for the public to take a look at. And so that is what's on the table right now, but it's on the table to be discussed. And that's the reason why we're having the community meetings and the public hearings that we're having. And I'm going to mention again, but we also have a portal open to accept comments, and we've had citizens, and that's through the county's website. And people are using that portal, and for all of you that have done that, I thank you for using that as well, because it keeps us a good written record of what your comments are. So the requirements for redistricting, which you can see, is the law requires the board to change its boundaries on the magisterial districts every 10 years, and that has to occur in the year ending in 1, that's this year. The district changes have to reapportion the population among the districts, and we had, as most jurisdictions have, higher growth in some areas than others. There was growth throughout the county, but some disproportionate growth in certain of the magisterial districts. The boundary changes to the magisterial districts have to be based on the U.S. Census data. That's the only data that we are permitted to use. That is the only data that is available to us to do this task, and it is the data that we are using. Later we'll talk about a website that you can go to on Census that will allow you to drill right down into Chesterfield's data. I put this in yellow and with some underlining, and I would maybe even be bolded to make the point. But the redistricting of magisterial districts does not change or affect any school district boundaries. Okay, and that's important because a lot of the comments that we got on the portal, and I absolutely appreciate the concern. That there is a concern that the changes in the magisterial district boundaries will have a concurrent effect on school district boundaries. It actually has no effect whatsoever on school district boundaries. It will not cause any child to go to a different school. It doesn't have that effect, and it's not intended to. That whole process is a process that is done through the school board, the school district process. This is unrelated to that in its entirety. So I hope that puts put some of the people at ease that we're obviously concerned about that. I've got the clicker, so. These are the requirements, the rules on redistricting. There's a notion of contiguity. All parts of a district have to touch each other. That just happens to be an unusual district in Maryland that you're looking at. And that actually is contiguous because there are little pieces that actually touch there, but it's a hard-fought contiguity. Compact, there's, you know, we talk about squares and circles. It never gets to that. But even this district that you're looking at was found to be compact. This actually is fairly important and maybe more important than that may seem at first, and that is the boundaries of the magisterial district have to be certain kinds of features, and this is actually state law, state statute, that defines what those boundaries can be and what they can't be. So it has to be streets, rivers, other permanent features shown on maps, and those are specific maps that we have reference to. And if it's not shown on any of these particular maps, or they're not streets or they're not rivers that are clearly shown, then they cannot be used as a boundary. And we'll be talking throughout this presentation of some areas where that has had an effect or would have an effect if we tried to make some changes, because the boundaries just aren't there that we can use them. And finally, equal population. I put equal in quotes because it never gets there anywhere in any jurisdiction. But what we're trying to do is, quote, equalize the population so that the maximum deviation between districts is less than 5%, so that the highest population and the lowest population percentages, when you compare the two, that number is less than 5%. And that's considered to be equalized. Okay, and then there's this racial concept in requirements for redistricting, and that is can't result in packing or cracking. And packing means that I'm concentrating a racial voting block into one district for the purpose of removing the ability of that particular block to influence elections in surrounding districts. So it's an intent-based test, but that has to be the reason for doing it, is that's to remove what would otherwise be the ability to influence voting. And then cracking is the notion of breaking up racial block voting to water down the vote in an area to make it an ineffective vote, okay? All right, so the 2020 census, what normally happens is these numbers come out in roughly November of the year in which you have to redistrict. That's the norm. This year, for COVID and a variety of reasons, we did not even get any numbers that we could look at until August the 12th. So needless to say, that placed us 6 months behind in the process. And that, of course, required some pretty prompt action, because we have a 6-month delay in getting numbers, while at the same time, we've got the same deadline, which is the end of the year to get the redistricting done. So that deadline has not changed. That deadline actually is created by the Constitution of Virginia, so it's not even just a statute. The total population, the results that the census gives us total population, voting age population, race, and housing unit data. And again, we get what the census gives us. We don't really have, nor did we use, nor can we use data from any other source. It all is derived from the census. We know that the Chesterfield County's population grew, and that reflects the growth there. We're at 365, 306 residents, and that many housing units. The site that you see down at the bottom, I'm putting up, and this presentation will be available to you, so you can go back and actually pull up this slide and see this site, or if you want to try to write it down now. But this is the, if you click on this or use this address, it will take you directly to the Census Bureau's website, drilled down to Chesterfield County. So you won't have to go through the filtering process of getting to Chesterfield. You can bypass all that and get directly to the Census Bureau data. Okay. And again, that will be available to you. This presentation will be, and you can pull up this link when you look at it again. So the proposal that the board has agreed to make available to the public at this point for discussion, we'll talk about sort of where we came from. These are the numbers from the 2020 census, and these numbers show that, of course, that Matoaca grew at a higher pace, as did Bermuda. That Midlothian stayed kind of even. Clover Hill and Dale lost population, but only in relation to the other districts. Okay, every district gained population, but there was some loss in relation to the other. So what you see is the deviation from what would be the perfect, sort of the perfect population, a pure 1/5 of the population. So those deviation numbers at the end of that chart are how far off that perfect number we would be. So this actually is the current map. This is the map that we use as of today, and will be the map until this plan is actually ultimately adopted by the board. Again, scheduled for the 17th of November. And so this is the way that the county is currently laid out. And again, after discussion with the board, with the board members about how to equalize as, relatively equalize, as I've already explained it, how would we change this map to get to that equalized population that stays within the 5%? And so this is what the plan that is currently out there, that we're going to talk about tonight. This was the plan. There are basically 4 changes. And this tells you who gains population, which district gains population, and from whom that population comes from. So there are, again, 4 different areas. 2 of them are very close to each other, which is the Dale gains up at in the sort of the middle of the map. Those 2 gains are actually adjacent to each other. And interestingly, the Midlothian gains and the Clover Hill gains on the western side of the map, on the left-hand side, those gains actually are adjacent to each other as well. So it's 2 areas of adjacency that the board put in this proposal. Okay. What I want to then do is go through each one of these changes, the map that shows the change, and we'll keep coming back to this redistricting map because I think it makes it a little easier to keep track of where we are. So we're going to start with the Midlothian edition, and this is the one on the far west. Okay, and this is just an addition that comes from Matoaca. It is relatively unpopulated. It's 365 people within that particular area. And as you can see, it's bounded by Genito Road, Ottertail Road, and Powhatan County. And then the northern boundary is the existing Midlothian boundary. Okay? So that's the first of the 4 proposed changes. So we'll go back to this, and we're going to go back to the if you take a look at the Dale gains from Clover, or Dale gains from Midlothian, I'm sorry. Dale gains 1575 from Midlothian, okay? That is this little segment. And this is a portion of the Pocoshock voting precinct, the southern portion of that precinct. And it is, as you can see, that it's bounded by Dale on both sides and by Walmsley Boulevard to the north, okay? So going back to this, let me just see what we're going to do. Yeah, Manchester. This is that Dale gains 2318 from Clover Hill, and that is the entirety of the Manchester voting precinct, which is right there. And it's Dale on one side, Clover Hill on the other side. Interestingly, this was actually talked about, and Jim may remember, this was talked about in the last redistricting as going to Dale, but at that time the population numbers didn't necessarily work. So this was actually a matter of discussion at the time. But Newby's Bridge Road is the Clover Hill boundary, and then Falling Creek to the south, Belmont Road, and the existing Dale district. And then Dorton Way Drive is actually the drive that separates the slide we just looked at from the Pocoshock precinct. So the Pocoshock precinct and Manchester abut each other, okay? And then finally is the Clover Hill gains 5867 from Matoaca. And this is a portion of the Woodlake subdivision. It's actually the entirety of the Tomahawk voting precinct, plus the Cambria Cove area, which is currently part of the Skin Quarter voting precinct. And I want to pause here for a second because we got a lot of comments through the comment portal. And again, thank you for these comments because it makes it actually easier to be able to respond to them. A lot of comments from people in Woodlake that don't want to be split between Matoaca and Clover Hill. And I certainly appreciate the comments, as do the board members as well. We do have magisterial district lines that split that do split communities, that split subdivisions. We took a look at how we might include the entirety of Woodlake into Clover Hill, because Clover Hill has to take on more people to equalize. That's a necessity, so it has to happen. And so we were saying, what if we just added all of Woodlake? To do that, we found that due to the other requirement that I talked about earlier, which is the requirement for geographic features being the boundaries, that to be able to include all of Woodlake and meet that requirement under state law, we necessarily would actually have to split the Foxcroft subdivision to make it work. So we'd be splitting the next subdivision down. The other thing is it added so much population that it threw us outside of that 5% spread in population between highest and lowest. So it had those two issues that came up. So, and while I do understand the comments, I want to tell you, we did at least look at that, and it didn't look like we could make that work. But again, I again appreciate the comments. So the proposal that I just went through with those four changes, this is the ultimate result. Again, it gave us the population deviations, which kept us within the 5%. So that was really the first thing that we checked, was to make sure that by doing this, that we could satisfy the population, the equalization part, okay? And then we were also looking at what was the change to the actual demographics numbers. How did those change? So we did this with, again, with the same data which is provided by the Census Bureau. So this is all using Census Bureau numbers. And as you can see, the percentages in Dale, there are some slight percent of a percent change, but all modest, and you know, I think every change in Dale was under 1%. In Matoaca, the changes went pretty much, I think, under 1% change all the way across the board, yes. So the changes in Matoaca, again, fairly minor. Clover Hill District, you know, you're looking at some percentages there that were a little over a 1% change, point change, but still fairly modest. Midlothian likewise, you know, fairly modest changes in all categories. So, and I think that once we got done looking at equalization and then took a look at this, felt that this at least put us in a good place on fairly modest and minor changes in demographics. So the next steps are coming up. The public comment period is open, and again, people are availing themselves of that, and it is available. If you go online to chesterfield.gov/census, you'll go directly into that. And that would be a good place to start. You can comment that way. Certainly comment at the community meetings. And the next one, again, is on the 19th at 6 o'clock with Ms. Haley and Mr. Carroll. Will be here from Midlothian and the Matoaca districts. Public hearing on the 27th of October, but then no decision until the 17th of December, or November, I'm sorry, thank you, November. And that's good because all of that time period is available for public input. And that is the presentation. That's kind of where we are at this moment. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't go straight into comments.
Okay.
If that's
Dr. Casey, would you like to make a comment?
Just a
before we
brief
start, please?
comment, and I encourage the audience tonight also to review the board videotape of the presentation that Mr. Minks did and some of the commentary there. I encourage everyone to tune into the next two community meetings because while the presentation may not necessarily change, the comments and some of the discussions afterwards will. I'll only briefly say that this is a required exercise that we go through every 10 years. I myself have been through this 4 times now since 1990. Mr. Minks might have actually been here one more decade than I have. But it is not just a math and legal exercise. You know, that's the requirements. This is also a public service exercise that we go through. And if it's not explicitly clear, what we are going through right now does not change anything that pertains to this November election and your precinct and how you vote. So
Thank you.
We do encourage you all to do exactly what you would have normally done during these processes. And part of the action is, as Mr. Minks referenced, of why we are not taking the effective date until mid-November, November 17th, is just to further illustrate the separation between this November's election and how this redistricting will apply for elections subsequent to that date. I also just like to say that, again, the citizens and how we try to divide them all by 5, it doesn't this isn't registered voters. We do encourage everyone who's an eligible voter to register. We try to make that as easy and accessible as possible. And for those that don't know, the early voting processes that Chesterfield County implemented last year, we were leaders in the state in having our libraries serve as portals, 4 of them. And the Board of Supervisors actually just recently approved a 5th library to be added to such service for you. And those early voting libraries, I believe, open up October 18th. Last but not least, I do encourage everyone to look at the website of the census. That's something, quite frankly, in 1990, 2000, and even in 2010, was not as robust as it is today, or as accessible as it is today, and how we made portals available to you as a public. I would imagine those portals that did not exist in 2010 because some of the technologies, quite frankly, didn't exist. So as this is, in my career, this is the most service-oriented and mindful-oriented process that I have been through. And again, I hope you realize we're trying to serve you with as much information in as much of a transparent way. And quite frankly, the information that you can see on these websites is really the same information that was utilized for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Casey. Certainly, I want to say again that we hope this process will be transparent, open, and above all fair. And of course, the comments I do appreciate. I did read a number of comments. One comment had to do with they like everything just the way it is. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate those who disagree as well. That's the beauty of democracy. There's always opportunity to agree and disagree with your elected representatives. And of course, also I think it's important to note and to be very clear and transparent as well, and that in no case would I be affected by any changes made, either pro or con, in regards to redistricting, and nor would I ever attempt to do a process. I've always sought as an elected official to be fair, just, and transparent and honest in my dealings with our citizens and with, of course, everyone we deal with. So I just really appreciate your joining us tonight, and thank you for making your comments known to us. Please make sure you, by all means, vote. There's a Chesterfield happening that came out from our Media and Communications Department yesterday. It's replete, it's full of information about voting, where to vote, how to vote, absentee voting. So please make sure you do exercise that wonderful right that we enjoy, the right to vote and elect those we want to represent us. So make sure you vote, and encourage everyone in the family to vote as well.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. So I'll go just start with the comments, if that's okay, and we're just going to take them in order. That's the only way I can see them, so that's the right way to do them. As it relates to redistricting, and by the way, is everybody seeing this that's on Facebook Live? No. They can see the comments. All right, great. So as it relates to redistricting, at what point does Chesterfield require additional seats on elected boards to ensure appropriate representation is fulfilled in the community? At what point should this change, assuming we've not yet passed this stage? I will say that, first of all, there is no point legally that there is a requirement that there be only, the person can only represent so many people. Okay, there's never a point that we get to where there has to be an increase in the number of representatives that we have because of population. That's not a legal requirement at all. So again, I'm not sure that fairly answers that question. That can change at any time if there is a decision made to change the number of supervisors, number of magisterial districts, but there has not been any real discussion, I think, of that at this point. So the school board members elected by magisterial district, changing district boundary does change elected representatives areas. That is true. It does do that. And that is not only the school board, but is also the planning commission members will also then have new districts that they are representing as well. So yes, that is absolutely true. I will say that the proposal that we just went through does not change any representatives from any of the magisterial districts, so all incumbents will stay within their districts. That is Board of Supervisors, School Board, and Planning Commission. Access detail maps that show the natural boundaries. I am hoping that what we just showed you is doing that, but if it doesn't do it well enough, we can zoom this up better, but you may be able to find that you can do it yourself, but we can certainly try to produce something that is even zoomed up from what I showed you. But the individual maps that we had, that we showed you for each of the 4 areas, actually has as a definition those natural features, and at times one of the boundaries is the existing magisterial boundary line. So it's an already established line. I'm hoping that that's enough. If it's not, I guess just let us know, and we can come up with something that's probably even more detailed than that. Changes require splitting voting precincts. There are 2 of the precincts that would split as a result of this. One is the Skin Quarter precinct. Skin Quarter voting precinct in the western part of this of the county is extremely large in size, okay, in area, and this would actually have a portion of Skin Quarter going to Midlothian, a portion of Skin Quarter that would be going to Clover Hill, and a portion of it would still remain, if I'm not mistaken, Logan, and you can help me, would still remain in Matoaca. Yeah, and so yes, there would be a split in that area, but it really is a function of just how large that voting precinct is. The Pocashock voting precinct that's right next to the Manchester voting precinct, that would actually be split as well. I do want to bring up now, and thank you all thank you for that question, because as Mr. Winslow mentioned, we are still waiting for the state's redistricting, and they redistrict both the House of Delegates and the Senate and the congressional districts. So we are always sort of wondering where those lines are going to be, because those lines can end up splitting precincts too, and we really can't control that. So there may be another adjustment as soon as the state gets done with what it's doing. So I thank you for bringing that up. We up to 7 now? We are, okay. Would these areas be new precincts or be added to existing precincts? That is a process that we go over with the registrar. State law has all sorts of requirements on voting precincts, driven a lot by population, and so it's never easy to say until the redistricting decision is made exactly what's going to happen to those precincts. So we're working with the registrar right now. You know, since we only have really 2 split precincts to deal with, it's a little easier than it normally is. But yes, we will be working with the registrar to come up with those precincts, but they will be based on some state law requirements. Data used to create the districts, the only data that we have to use, and the only data that we did use, was the census. So, so it was the census data, and again, to explain the process, we started off with population. Population was the driving force for where property could be taken or you know, deducted or added from various precincts. So the data that we used was all driven by that census. That was to create the districts. On that particular point, though, is that when we got done with an equalization that would meet the criteria, we then took a look at the racial numbers, what happened to the racial demographics, and again, the data for that was all derived from the census as well. The rationale was just that that can I go back? I don't know if I can pull up the map again. If you go back to the portion of the presentation that showed the Pocashock and the Manchester districts. There has always been a desire to even that area out, to smooth it out, make it more compact. It was talked about, yeah, thank you. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's go back to can we switch back to the question? Right, thank you, Joe. Okay. Yeah, it really is 9 and 10. Since Midlothian was 193 away from the target, why is the district changed at all? What's the rationale for moving 1575 out of Dale from precincts on the eastern side, adding 365 from Matoaca in the west? And that really is the next question as well. That's a very similar question. And 11 is related. So 11 is also dealing with Clover Hill taking on the, or Dale taking on the Manchester district. Okay, so they're all sort of related. There was a desire, actually 10 years ago, to smooth out that line. If we can now go back to, and see if I can get to it. Yeah, there, it's this and this, which are adjacent to each other. Without those changes, what happens in the Clover Hill, Dale, and Midlothian districts, particularly in Midlothian, is that you're going down and up and down and up. And so it's like a sawtooth before these changes. These changes even out particularly the Dale precinct in that area, but also the Matoaca precinct and the Midlothian precinct. So it evens both of those out. So a lot of it had to do with that. A lot of it had to do with the fact that that there had been talk about the Manchester voting precinct going to Dale for a decade.
At least it did happen 10 years ago. We just didn't effectuate it, bring it to pass, but we did discuss it.
Yeah.
As I recall, I added some from Bermuda 10 years ago, an area, northern Bermuda.
Right, that's correct.
10 years ago, thank you.
So this I guess was sort of a thought from past, but it was a thought that actually helped smooth out a line. So that really was I think the one of the driving reasons why that was done. Okay, and then back to the questions if we could. Yeah, thank you. How do you collect citizen input to do this work? That's what this is. Okay, the whole notion of putting together a proposal is just to put something out for the public to look at. It is not in granite, and it's not even close. And as I think as Chairman Holland has been saying fairly consistently, we have a long period here. We have well over a month for input on this. So the citizen input is, we're involved in that right now. Actually, the portal itself was opened the day of the board meeting, and of the September 22nd board meeting when the board looked at this proposal. So we have been receiving public comment from that time, and I think it started coming in relatively quickly. And it's continuing, so we're still receiving comments on the portal. Again, it's the map options that were considered were generally considered to try to figure out the population issues. Like every redistricting process, there are always other options, okay? There's always other property. That never changes. Every 10 years, there are a lot of ways that it might happen. There are, however, these rules that we have to stay within, so it's not an infinite number of possibilities, but there are possibilities, yes. So in putting the map options, when you say map options, there is just a proposal on the table. All the comments that we are receiving are technically options that the board can consider. So, and this is, one part of this question is, will you consider citizen input enough to make changes to what you've presented here? And I would say that the board has set this process up, as Dr. Casey mentioned. This process has been set up with input opportunities that were not even available to us in the previous redistricting. So this board has always been committed to taking the comments from the public, processing them, and ultimately making decisions in light of citizen input. This is not going to change in redistricting. That it will be very much that same process. So citizen input will most definitely be considered. Whether it ultimately will change the proposal, there are a lot of different options on that as well. So we'll see on that. But again, there's plenty of opportunity to speak, both in writing and then at the public hearing as well. What census tracts are included in each of the communities? Census tracts are a somewhat different division. Okay, and a census tract this is what census tracts are included in each of the communities and geographic segments proposed to be moved. Census tracts are not necessarily involved in any of the movements that we made. We actually are drilling down to a census block, which is a smaller component. The tracts are much larger, and they are composed of multiple census blocks. So they're really, census tracts are not necessarily what we looked at. You can actually go on to the census website, and you can actually look at the census blocks themselves that are involved in each of these. So I hope that answers that question. How will it affect elections in the future? Do you have information on how these areas vote? I don't, and all I can say is that's not part of this process. We don't look at what voting past practices. Let's see. This is a long question, so let me go ahead and just read the whole thing. Judging from the percentages of deviation from the ideal population reported on the tables in the PowerPoint, a more direct approach to the new maps would have excess population shifted from Bermuda into Dale and excess population from Matoaca shifted into Dale and Clover Hill. Did the county consider the simpler, more straightforward option, developing new maps, share any alternative maps that were considered? I have to say this method was a method of discussion, okay, with board members. Thank you. This was a discussion with board members on how to do things, and I'd say there was a fair amount of discussion. Were there other options looked at? Yes. Whether they precisely were that, I don't know that I recall each and every one of what was discussed. But I think that there was a discussion about some movement into Bermuda, and the result was, if I recall correctly, the result was that was going to split a neighborhood as well. And again, if there was no need to do that and still stay within the percentages, then it did not have to happen. But that's the one that I can recall from that list that you mentioned.
Question 17 is to me. Mr. Holland, you said that we should all vote for who we want to represent us well. Yes, you should vote. I agree with that 100%. Do you think that supervisor involvement in this process is appropriate given it looks like they are choosing their voters instead of the other way around. That's interesting perspective. Let me just say that I think everyone should be involved in this process, along with advising their supervisor, the elected official, for that given reason. We should always be involved in helping make decisions. And certainly, I'm not trying to choose voters, as I mentioned earlier, given that my track has been, I've been elected 4 times. However, that changes over the years. So I believe very strongly that everyone should be involved in the process. That's why we're here tonight, to listen, to gain your input, and certainly, in essence, you choose us as elected officials. We don't actually choose you. You vote. You make that happen by your voting, along with the others in the precinct and in the district. But thank you for that question. And again, I certainly don't want to be biased in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. I would like to point out, and certainly in the Dale District that we talked about, the Dale District is adding property, and this property that's not currently in the Dale District, so there's not a choice of Dale voters there. These would be new voters to Dale. And again, if I could just emphasize one more time, is that choosing voters or voting records or all that, it's not data that we had available or data that we use or data that we're allowed to use, if we even had it. So census data is all that was used. 18 is the Woodlake question again, but the fact that it's been asked, it could be somebody that came in later, and maybe if I could maybe explain that again, because we've gotten a lot of comments that are similar to what is the logic used to slice through Woodlake when the reservoir makes a perfect natural boundary. The first logic was the need for Clover Hill to come down into Matoaca. Matoaca had to lose population from somewhere. That was a place to lose it from. And again, I am sure that Mr. Carroll will tell you, and I'm sure he'll tell us next Tuesday, he doesn't like to lose any voters from the Matoaca district. And and I'm sure he'll make that point on Tuesday. But one of the questions is in so-called slicing through Woodlake and through a subdivision. What we found was that if we adhered to the rules on geographic boundaries and included all of Woodlake, that inclusion was going to have to cut through the Foxcroft subdivision and would end up dividing that subdivision, number one. So it would just be divide one subdivision as opposed to another. But the other part of it is that there were so many people in that particular area that if we had tried to add the entirety of Woodlake, it would take us above that 5% percentage limit that we need to stay under. So it had those two issues. The principal objective of these proposed maps appears to be incumbent protection. Can the board provide any other rationale to proposed maps? I guess I hope I have done that up to now in a discussion of some of how the lines were drawn, how the population was equalized, and I guess I don't necessarily accept the premise of the question, but the rationale I think we have gone now through in some detail on how we ended up with this proposal. And again, I don't know how many times we can emphasize that it is indeed just a proposal. Yeah. Yeah, let's see, to change this middle. Well, 20 actually is and this is relating to smoothing out lines. Appears to move minority areas out of Midlothian and Clover Hill and put them in Dale. What's more important, smoothing lines, avoiding packing? We're not talking about packing here. That really is not an issue. In fact, you certainly take a look at the numbers that we showed in Dale, and you can pretty much show that that's not the case. But There isn't really a priority necessarily order. All these factors are in play. And I think what was the most important, I'd say what is more important, we probably need to go back to what was the most important as we began this, and that was population, was moving the population, make sure that the numbers worked in that regard. And then we looked at, and what effect does that have? Okay. Do I have detailed statistics regarding race and ethnicity? I guess that means beyond what we've already talked about. We have them broken down. We have them already broken down very, very precisely on a district by district basis. And if this, if the question here is on each of the 4 changes, then there is demographic data available that we can actually figure that out on each of the 4. Yeah, we can put that. We can do. And I'm checking with the person that has access to the program, and that's correct. Yeah. Okay. When this discussion took place with board members, yeah, that was basically, I think the discussions were pretty much as soon as the numbers came in and we were able to verify what we had received. But there was also then the process of acquiring a software program that would allow us to work with those census data numbers. So I would say that took place pretty much, I think it was as soon as we had that program available. Matoaca is entirely too large. I really, let's see. Yeah, Matoaca district's entirely too large. Is there any thought to be given to splitting it in half to allow for effective board representation? There really has not been a discussion about doing that. You know, I think Mr. Carroll certainly can speak on behalf of the Matoaca district, but he certainly travels to represent his district.
Mr. Minks, I think that's the conclusion of the questions, but I would say this is the first of the 3 type of community meetings. So for those that may have other questions, we have the public portal, we have future community meetings. Please actually just enter your question in early in the process so that we can get to it first, hopefully for the next community meeting, Facebook Live. As always, you know, the portal provides contact information for those with questions, and we will give answers. And just one other point of clarification, this is the local districting process for the 5 magisterial districts of Chesterfield County. Everything and anything that you see referenced by the state process, which will also entail the federal process, and I think Mr. Winslow pointed out earlier, is not part of our exercise. And you know, and in fairness, I'm not sure the public portals and the information and all those census tracts and the data that we have alluded to and referred to and have hosted community meetings for public comment and being responsive to each and every question is being done at all by the state process to date. Yet they are on similar timelines as we are. And I know it was mentioned earlier too about the splitting of precincts. We take that topic seriously here. But again, in my career, what ends up happening often with the state processes is we actually run into a lot more issues with them splitting the precincts on the lines that they draw. I have always encouraged them throughout my career to follow the magisterial lines as a good perimeter, as it's been a much more public exercise in doing so. Unfortunately, they don't always heed such advice.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And again, we have a public comment portal that's open at chesterfield.gov Census. And you can tune in on October the 19th, 6 o'clock, Facebook Live, and then certainly show up. But you can keep comments coming in, and you can show up at the public hearing as well on the 27th of October. So plenty of opportunity input on this proposal. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Have a good evening.